December 1986, Newtown, Connecticut. A quiet suburban town blanketed by a snowstorm so severe it felt like the world itself had paused.
Roads deserted, streetlights swallowed by swirling snow, visibility so low you couldn't see the house across the street.
That night, 39-year-old flight attendant Helle Crafts landed at JFK Airport after an international flight from Frankfurt
She got into a car and headed home to her husband and her 3 children.
and would never be seen alive again.
No body, no obvious crime scene, no witnesses.
Just snow and silence.
Until months later, fragments of her life and her remains began to surface in the most horrifying way imaginable.
Welcome to Crime and Unwind, Snapped Edition.
We're back!
Hey!
Did you
Did
miss
you
us?
I know, I missed this.
I did too. We missed you.
Yeah, we did.
All right. Our podcast where we pour the wine.
And dissect the crime.
I'm Aixa.
And I'm Denise.
All right. Before we get started, our wine of the day, we have a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. It's called Tipa. I like it. I think
good.
it's really light. I tried it before.
I'm excited.
Yes, I think
I
you're gonna
love
like
me a
it.
Sauvignon Blanc.
You gonna like it.
All right. Cheers to season 3. That was a 1. Oh, yeah, that's good.
I knew you would
That's
like it.
good.
Yes.
That is banging. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
All right. So tonight we're exploring one of the most meticulously calculated murders in American history.
Yep, this is the case of Helle Crafts.
And in Snapped Edition, we ask, did someone lose control?
Or did they plan every step? So before we talk about the crime, we need to talk about who Helle was.
Yeah. Because victims in cases like this often get reduced to evidence. But Helle Crafts had a life that stretched across continents.
Yeah. Helle Lork Nielsen was born in Denmark in 1947. She grew up in a small town outside Copenhagen. Friends would describe her as independent, curious, and adventurous.
She spoke multiple languages and loved travel. So becoming a flight attendant was the perfect career for her.
And not just any airline. She worked for Pan American World Airways, Pan Am.
Yes, which at the time was basically the gold standard of aviation. Working for Pan Am in the 1970s and 80s meant prestige, international travel, and financial independence.
Yep. And through aviation circles, she met a man named Richard Crafts.
Yes, Richard was an Eastern Airlines pilot, but his background was a little unusual.
Before flying commercial jets, he had been a Connecticut state trooper, and he also served as an auxiliary police officer.
Yep, which meant he knew law enforcement procedures, investigations, and evidence handling. And that detail will become incredibly important later.
Yep. Helle and Richard married in 1979. They settled in Newtown, Connecticut, a quiet, picturesque town about 70 miles outside of New York City.
They had 3 children, Jeffrey, David, and Kristen.
Now, to anyone looking from the outside, this was the American dream.
Yep, a big suburban home, 2 professional careers, 3 kids.
Yep, but behind closed doors, things were definitely unraveling.
Yeah. So by the mid-1980s, the marriage between Helle and Richard was deteriorating rapidly.
So Richard was frequently away from work. And when he wasn't, their relationship was super strained.
Yeah. Friends later testified that he became distant, cold, and increasingly unfaithful.
Yeah. In fact, Richard had multiple affairs.
Yeah. And Helle eventually discovered one of them.
Yep. She hired a private investigator named Keith Mayo.
Mayo followed Richard and photographed him with another woman.
That evidence confirmed what Helle had suspected for months. Her marriage was collapsing.
Yeah. But Helle didn't explode in anger. Instead, she started planning.
She met with a divorce attorney. She quietly began collecting financial documents, bank records, property records, retirement accounts.
Yep. So because Helle understood something very clearly, divorce, it's not just emotional, it's financial.
Yeah, and Richard had a lot to lose.
Yes. A divorce for him could mean division of assets, child support, alimony,
and possibly damage to his reputation as an airline pilot.
but there was something else, something chilling.
Helle reportedly told several friends something very specific.
She said, if anything happens to me, don't assume it was an accident.
Those words would later echo throughout the courtroom.
Whew, gives me chills.
Yeah.
November 18th, 1986, Helle finishes a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt.
She lands at JFK Airport and makes the trip home to Connecticut.
Yep. But that night, the weather turns brutal.
A massive snowstorm swept through the region. Blizzard conditions, strong winds, and a whiteout visibility.
The kind of storm where most people stay home, where the roads become nearly impassable.
And the next morning, Helle was gone.
Richard told authorities they had argued. He said she packed a bag and left the house sometime during the night.
But investigators quickly noticed problems with that story.
First, her car was still in the driveway.
Second, her luggage was unpacked.
Third, her passport and paycheck were still inside the house.
And none of it looked like someone planning to leave voluntarily.
Then investigators spoke with the neighbors. And what they reported was pretty strange.
Yeah. Several neighbors said that they had heard machinery running late that night.
But it didn't sound like a snowblower.
It sounded industrial.
As investigators began looking into Richard's activities around that time, a disturbing pattern started to emerge.
So just days before Helle disappeared, Richard had rented a wood chipper.
Yep. He also rented a chainsaw,
He purchased gasoline.
plus large amounts of plastic sheeting.
And investigators also discovered that he had purchased a large chest freezer shortly before her disappearance.
So prosecutors would later argue that these purchases, they weren't coincidental. They were preparation.
Their theory was horrifying,
They believed Helle had been killed inside her home.
likely by blunt force trauma, though the exact cause of death could never be determined.
So afterwards, prosecutors argued that her body was placed in the freezer, frozen,
Why freeze a body?
because frozen tissue becomes rigid and much easier to cut or process with machinery.
And according to prosecutors, during the snowstorm, Richard transported the body to a remote location near Lake Zoar.
There, investigators believed he used the wood chipper to destroy her body. Whew. Investigators eventually focused their search along the banks of Lake Zoar, a reservoir surrounded by wooded areas.
Yeah, it was isolated, especially during the winter storm.
Yes, and what they found was painstaking. Over several months, investigators combed the shoreline piece by piece.
Ultimately, authorities recovered approximately 2,660 bone fragments.
They also found 10 teeth, hair fragments, fingernail pieces, and fabric fibers.
And even fragments of a chainsaw blade.
It wasn't a body, it was pieces scattered across the shoreline mixed with debris.
So forensic anthropologists began examining the fragments.
Right, so dental records eventually confirmed that the remains belonged to Helle.
And experts also noticed something very disturbing. Many bones showed a clean mechanical cut pattern.
Marks consistent with high-speed blades, like those found in wood chippers.
The evidence was gruesome, but scientifically powerful.
Yeah, because there was still a massive challenge in this case.
There was no intact body, no traditional crime scene.
Nope. Yet prosecutors pushed forward anyway.
And that decision would make legal history.
Yes. So this case became the first murder conviction in Connecticut without a complete body.
A landmark moment in forensic prosecution, proving that justice doesn't require a body, only evidence.
No. So by early 1987, investigators believed they had enough evidence.
On January 11th, 1987, Richard Crafts was arrested and charged with murder.
The media quickly picked up the story.
Yep. And newspapers gave it a chilling nickname.
The Woodchipper Murder.
Yep. The public's reaction was insane.
Because the alleged method was so shocking and because Richard himself seemed so calm.
Almost detached.
So even during questioning, investigators said he appeared composed, methodical, controlled.
Richard's first trial began in 1988.
So the prosecution laid out their theory piece by piece.
They presented evidence of the rented wood chipper, the chainsaw, the freezer, the gasoline.
They presented forensic experts who described the bone fragments, the cut marks, and the distribution of the remains.
And they also presented testimony from neighbors about the late night machinery sounds.
But the defense pushed back hard.
They argued the evidence was circumstantial.
Yep, no eyewitnesses, no confirmed cause of death, no body.
After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated and deliberated.
But they couldn't reach a unanimous decision.
The jury was deadlocked.
A mistrial was declared.
For many defendants, that might have been the end, but prosecutors, they weren't finished.
In 1989, Richard Crafts was tried again.
This time, the prosecution refined the case. They focused heavily on the forensic science
and the timeline of Richard's actions before and after Helle disappeared.
And after deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty.
Richard Crafts was convicted of murder.
He was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
A conviction built almost entirely on forensic reconstruction and circumstantial evidence.
One of the most complex homicide prosecution of its time.
Yes. So this is the question we always ask in Snapped Edition. Did someone snap, or was this strategy?
In this case, the evidence leaned heavily towards planning.
So there was no insanity defense.
No documented mental breakdown.
So instead, investigators saw a pattern: preparation, equipment purchases, concealment.
The timing, the storm, the remote disposal site.
Everything suggested calculation, not panic.
Which raises an uncomfortable truth.
Some crimes aren't explosions of emotions.
They're decisions. The murder of Helle Crafts changed forensic law forever.
Yes, it proved that even when a killer tries to erase every trace, science can still speak.
Yep, and sometimes the smallest fragments.
Yes, can tell the biggest stories.
Yep, so this has been Crime and Unwind, Snapped Edition, Season 3, Episode 1.
Next week, we explore the tragic and controversial case of Andrea Yates.
That's right, and until then, stay aware, stay safe.
And don't ignore the red flags.
That part.